I think that most politicians will take a look at headline opinion polls if they're in the papers, and the stuff I used to read and thought was important was the qualitative focus group reports. I found much more interesting than polls. And as for surveys of who's up, who's down, I mean, they're just journalists who put together a list because they know that people like to read lists. And I thought the one in GQ recently, which had Cameron and Osborne ahead of Gordon Brown as the most influential people in Britain, I think it's just part of this growing trend in our media that is basically trying to tell the public that the election's over before it's happened. And you see it at every level. I mean, it was fascinating the other day when you had Gordon, David Cameron, Nick Clegg all made speeches to the CBI, pretty big speeches on the economy, and then you get to the 10 o'clock news on the BBC, there's not a line, not a word. Instead there was some piece about George Osborne sort of going shopping in B&Q and talking about green policy, and it was weird, and I think it's the same as happened obviously with the Sun having decided to back the Tories. Now they feel they've really got to put all the stops out for them because they're probably a bit worried that actually they're not that far ahead in the polls. And I think that mood is just developing where the media are basically saying, look, the election's over, folks, let's just move on, forget about it. So I think that the list that had Cameron and Osborne as more influential than Gordon. I mean, when all is said and done, Gordon is the Prime Minister, and you have a lot of power if you're the Prime Minister. And I think what it was a political point by a guy who's anyway a mate of Cameron's. And I think that's the other thing that's developing is this sense of the Tories are an elite, and they've got their own elite at the top, and they're going to run the country for an elite. And the best evidence of that is that their one big commitment that they will not move off is this idea of an inheritance tax cut for the 3,000 richest estates in the country. And I still think it's weird. I don't know why they're so wedded to it, but then you think actually what sort of people they are, and Tories, and haven't really fundamentally changed, and they're going to look after their own. I think every media organisation has some interest. Every citizen ought to have some interest in what happens in the political scene. But you talk about the GQ magazine. I mean, the editors. I think he's done a book on Cameron. I mean, they're pretty close mates, I think. So it didn't surprise me to see that. But I really don't think it's a big deal. I think what is a big deal is that the media kind of just want to try to persuade the public that this election's all over. And the reality is, as I've been saying on my blog and on here for yonks, provided the Labour Party keep defending the record, keep whacking out the forward agenda with real verve and vigour and gusto, and show that we understand the modern world in a way that the Tories frankly don't, and keep attacking the Tories properly, then I still think it's game on. But you've got to see that if you kind of look at things fairly objectively, you do, you look at the economy and the fact we've been through this huge global economic crisis, which has had a pretty big impact on the country and people's worries about their living standards and their jobs and so forth. You've had the whole sense of Labour being in power too long, which is always a very time for change is always a very powerful political message. You've had the expenses scandal, which that's affected all parties, but if you're the governing party, you're probably going to take more of the political hit on that. You've had all the kerfuffle about the top jobs in Europe. You've had the inquiry into the Iraq war being started. You've had all these things that are projected and has been very, very, very bad. Very negatively for the Labour government, and you've got Cameron getting the easiest ride that any political leader, in my view, has ever had from the British press, and yet he's still not out of sight. And I think the reason for that is the public are they're not convinced. They're not convinced by him. They're not convinced that the Tories have fundamentally changed, and they also want to have a proper choice and a proper debate, which at the moment I'm not sure they're really getting through much of the media, who basically want to say to them, look folks, forget about it, it's all over, we've decided, we the pundits have spoken, the Tories are in, and I think the public are beginning to resent that.